She hadn't planned to answer the phone that morning. Emily Shaw had learned to ignore most calls that started with unfamiliar area codes, especially ones from towns she hadn't stepped foot in for 15 years. But something about the way it rang, not just sudden, but intentional, made her thumb pause above the red button. When she heard the voice on the other end, something inside her chest shifted. Not fear, not sorrow. Just the dull click of something old and mechanical turning over again after too long in silence. "Emily, it's Nurse Rhonda. I'm calling from Willow Grove. I'm afraid your grandmother's had a fall." The words swam. "She's stable, but the break was bad. Hip, she's resting now. She's been asking for you." That part hit harder than it should have. Emily didn't answer right away. Her silence lingered long enough that Rhonda filled the space with facts, medication names, visiting hours, rehab timelines. Emily only half listened. Her eyes were locked on the window, where a single leaf clung stubbornly to the branch outside, out of season, out of place, out of time. By the time she arrived in Ashton Hollow, it was early evening. The roads were still narrow, still flanked by half-breathing woods, and still held the kind of quiet that city people often mistake for peace. She parked outside the old house and sat in the car with the engine off, listening. Not for anything specific, just listening. The house hadn't changed much. The porch sagged in the same places. The mailbox leaned slightly to the left. Even the faint scratch on the front door, the one she made when she was 8, chasing a cat with a stick, was still there. But there was something else now. Something missing. She stepped out and immediately felt it. The stillness of a place waiting too long to speak. Arthur met her at the door. He looked older, of course he did, but not weaker. His shoulders still squared too tightly. His eyes still searched too long before blinking. "You didn't have to come," he said without moving aside. "I did." A beat passed, then another. Finally, he stepped back. The air inside the house was colder than it should have been. Not chilly. Cold. Like a window had been left open upstairs, or like the place hadn't been warmed from the inside in years. Arthur led her to the den where her grandmother lay curled under a thick quilt. The woman looked small, too small for someone who had once commanded every corner of this house with just a glance. "Emmy?" The voice was faint. Papery. Emily knelt beside her, brushing a gray curl from her forehead. "I'm here." The old woman smiled. Or tried to. "Still got your grandfather's eyes." Emily didn't mention the bruises. Not yet. But they were there, faint yellow shadows under the skin of her arm. She didn't look directly at Arthur either, though she felt his eyes on her. That night, she unpacked in the guest room and left the light on. At 2:47 a.m., a sound woke her. Not the creak of old floors, not the wind. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. From inside the wall behind her. She didn't move. Didmrez. Then silence. Nothing more. Just enough to plant something beneath her skin. A question. Or the memory of one. When morning came, she sat alone in the kitchen, stirring coffee that had long gone cold. Arthur hadn't come downstairs yet. The chair across from her still had the faint indent of someone sitting there, though she knew it had been empty when she came in. Then her grandmother's voice, faint from the hallway. "Don't let him paint over it again." Emily turned. What? But the hallway was empty. The old woman had never left her room. By morning, the house had already begun to rearrange itself. Not physically, not in the way that walls move or doors relocate, but in the subtler ways: shadows changing angles, dust settling in patterns that weren't there the night before. The smell of the place felt different too. Less like old wood and more like something that had learned to hold its breath. Emily stood at the kitchen sink, staring at the field beyond the tree line. It used to be corn. She remembered running barefoot through it as a child, the stalks taller than her head, the air thick with pollen and her own giggles. Now it was flat and brittle, forgotten. Like someone had tried to grow something and then lost the will to tend it. Behind her, the coffee pot gurgled its last breath. She poured a cup and didn't drink. Her grandmother was awake, propped against too many pillows in the den, eyes flicking from the window to the television, though the volume was off. When Emily stepped in, the old woman's eyes tracked her but said nothing. "I heard something last night," Emily said softly, not yet sitting. The old woman blinked slowly. "Don't tell Arthur." Emily frowned. "I'm not afraid of him. That's not what I said." Her voice was steadier now, low and oddly lucid. I just meant, there are some things you don't bring into the light, the woman cut in. They grow too well in it. Emily sat. What happened to your arm? Silence. Then, just as she began to think the moment had slipped away, the old woman whispered, "It wasn't the fall." Later that day, Arthur appeared in the doorway while Emily was folding laundry, a chore he hadn't asked her to do. He leaned against the frame like it was his by birthright. "You're staying long?" he asked without looking at her. "I don't know yet." He nodded slowly, eyes sweeping across the room like a tide collecting driftwood. "She's not what she used to be. Says all kinds of things now. Don't mean nothing." Emily folded a towel. "Don't dig into things that aren't yours, Emmy," he added. She looked up. "You still call me that. You still act like her favorite." The air stretched between them like an old wire, thin and humming. That afternoon, Emily ventured into the attic, not because she was looking for anything in particular, just because. The ladder creaked, the trapdoor groaned, and when she pulled herself up into the space, the dust moved in a way that made her hesitate, like it had been disturbed just minutes earlier. The attic was mostly empty now. Old trunks, a broken fan, a baby walker with one wheel missing, and a single rocking chair that faced the dormer window, even though no one could sit there without brushing cobwebs from their face. She crossed the space, her boots quiet against the wooden floor, and paused in front of a large wardrobe pressed flush against the far wall. She didn't remember it. Not from childhood. Not from photographs. The style didn't match anything else in the house, too sleek, too modern. And locked. No keyhole. No handle. Just two polished wooden panels that met seamlessly. She placed her hand against it. Warm. Not just warm human. She stepped back, and for just a second, as she turned away, she thought she heard breathing. Not loud. Not labored. Just near. That night, she made the guest bed up tighter than necessary and laid a small audio recorder on the nightstand. Not for proof. For permission. As if by recording she was letting the house know, "I'm listening." At 2:43 a.m., she sat up. No knocking. But not silence either. A hum. Faint, rhythmic, like the sound of power lines on a windless night. She got up and walked to the hallway. Nothing moved. But at the bottom of the stairs, just before the front door, she saw something small on the floor. A coin. No, not quite. It was smooth, slightly oval and pale. She picked it up. A tooth. Tiny. Child-sized. Clean. The next morning, Arthur was already in the kitchen, stirring something in a pot too early for soup. He didn't look at her. Just said, "She's been talking again." Emily waited. "Said you found something. Said you heard it." He turned then. His eyes sharp, wet. "You really want to know what this place remembers?" he asked. Emily met his gaze. "I think I already do." Arthur smiled. Not kindly. "I doubt that." He dropped the spoon into the sink and left the room. And when she looked down into the pot, the broth had gone red. The broth had gone red. Emily stared at the pot for a moment longer, the surface shimmering with a soft, unnatural tint. Not blood. But not quite not either. Something metallic clung to the back of her throat just from looking at it. She stepped back from the stove, quiet. Arthur was nowhere in sight. She poured the contents into the sink without hesitation, watching it swirl away into the drain, like it was taking something with it, something that had no business being above ground. Her grandmother was asleep when she checked in next, the quilt pulled high up to her chin, one hand resting outside it, fingers twitching slightly with a dream she wouldn't speak of when she woke. Emily sat beside her for a long while, not trying to wake her, just watching the way the woman's breathing stuttered, then smoothed, then paused again like her body was uncertain whether to keep going. The bruises on her arms had faded slightly. But that didn't comfort her. Some bruises go inward, they just stop showing. Later, in the hallway, Emily stood before the attic ladder again. She hesitated, but something gnawed at her. The wardrobe she didn't remember, the warmth of the wood, the breath that didn't belong. She climbed back up slowly. Dust greeted her like a waiting animal, not with hostility, but expectation. This time she brought a flashlight. Its beam cut through the stillness in slices, revealing outlines that hadn't moved, and corners that seemed to recede just slightly when touched by light. She approached the wardrobe again. Still seamless. Still silent. Still wrong. She ran her hand down the surface once, twice, then stopped as her fingers caught a groove near the bottom. She crouched. There, almost invisible, was a tiny seam no thicker than a thread. Not enough to open, but enough to suggest that something had once been designed to. She pressed against it. Nothing happened. But somewhere, distantly beneath the house, maybe she felt something give. Not a sound. Not a tremor. A pressure, a yes. She spent the rest of the afternoon in the old study, a room she hadn't visited since childhood. Her grandfather's things were still there untouched, gathering memory. The books on the shelf were arranged alphabetically, though no one had read them in decades. A photo frame sat face down on the desk. She turned it over. A picture of her grandmother, much younger, standing beside a tree that had long since been cut down. There was someone beside her, a girl maybe 13, wearing a white dress. The face had been scratched out. Not clumsily. Surgically. There was no name on the back. No date. But the photo was stamped with a studio mark, from a town 3 counties over, a place Emily had never heard her grandmother mention. She pocketed it without thinking. Something about the girl or the absence of her made her skin tighten. That night, Emily didn't sleep. She lay in bed, fully clothed, the small recorder blinking red beside her, and waited. At exactly 2:41 a.m., a soft creak outside her door. Then a click. The recorder stopped. The red light vanished. She sat up, heart ticking fast. Silence. Then, from the hallway, a whisper. Not words. Not breath. Just the shape of sound pretending to be silence. She opened the door. Nothing. Only the long stretch of corridor, dark and still. But on the floor, neatly centered on the rug, was something small. She bent down. A white bow, child-sized, faintly frayed at the edge. Emily turned it over in her hand. A single initial stitched in faded thread. L. The next morning, Arthur acted like nothing had happened. He made toast. He whistled a tune she didn't recognize. He asked how she slept. Emily didn't answer. Instead, she laid the bow on the kitchen table between them. He looked at it, didn't blink, then slowly reached out and slid it toward himself. Found that, did you? Who was she? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You already know the answer. Emily stared at him. No, she said. I don't think I do, but I'm going to find out. Arthur leaned back in his chair and folded the bow once, carefully, like he was putting something to rest. I hope, for your sake, he said, you don't remember. The day passed like water through cloth, slow, soaked with silence, heavy where it shouldn't be. Emily drove into town after lunch, under the excuse of needing fresh groceries. The truth was simpler. She needed air that hadn't passed through the lungs of that house. The town hadn't changed much since she was a child. Same crooked gas station. Same faded green post office. Same men leaning against the same corner outside the hardware store, still wearing hats they hadn't earned and stories they'd long since polished into myth. She parked in front of Carter's Market and grabbed a cart she didn't plan to fill. Inside, she wandered the aisles as if in a dream, placing items into the cart out of habit more than intention. Cans of soup, a small bag of flour, tea she didn't drink. Then a voice. Soft, familiar. Emily? She turned. A woman in her late 50s stood beside the baking aisle, holding a box of saltines like it might answer something. It took Emily a moment to place her. Carolyn Wexler, her grandmother's old neighbor, the one with the big collie and the rose bushes that never died even in frost. I heard you were back, Carolyn said. Didn't believe it at first. I wasn't sure I'd believe it either, Emily replied. They stood in silence for a beat, the way people do when they've skipped too many chapters in each other's lives. I'm sorry about your grandmother, Carolyn finally offered. She's lucky you came, especially now. Emily tilted her head. Now? Carolyn lowered her voice, glanced once over her shoulder. I shouldn't say anything. It's not my place. But people've noticed things. For a while now. Your uncle, the way he talks to her, keeps her in. Folks stopped coming by. They thought maybe she didn't want visitors anymore. Emily's throat tightened. She didn't. But not because she chose that. Carolyn hesitated. Did she ever talk to you about the girl? That stopped everything. What girl? You wouldn't remember. You were just a kid. Maybe 7? She used to visit with her mother. Real quiet. Blonde hair. Big eyes. They stopped coming around sudden. Evelyn said she moved, but I always thought. She trailed off. Emily's chest went still. You know her name? She asked. Carolyn shook her head. No one ever said it, just called her the other girl. Back at the house, the silence had thickened, like it knew where she'd been. Emily put the groceries away without a word. Arthur was gone. His truck wasn't in the drive. That gave her a window. She climbed the stairs to the attic again, this time carrying the photo from the study and the bow from the hallway. The wardrobe was still there, still sealed, still waiting. She placed the photo against the wood, just beneath where the panels met, and whispered, without knowing why, "Tell me." Nothing happened. But when she stepped back, the seam at the bottom had widened. Barely, but enough. Enough to slip in the edge of the photo. She did. It vanished like breath in fog. That night, Evelyn spoke again. Emily had just finished brushing her grandmother's hair, slow and gentle, when the old woman took her wrist. Her grip was weak, but her voice was steel. "Don't go in the root cellar." Emily blinked. "What?" "It's not buried deep enough." She tried to ask more, but Evelyn had closed her eyes, lips pulled tight against words that wouldn't be born. Later, while reviewing the audio recorder, Emily found something. A single voice. Not hers. Not Evelyn's. Not Arthur. A child. Just 4 words, whispered between the hours. "Where did I go?" The next morning, the mailbox held a single envelope. No return address. Inside, a folded piece of yellowed paper with 3 words, hand-printed in uneven lines. "Check the swing." She didn't run. Not at first. She stood on the porch, staring out at the backyard where the birch trees gathered like witnesses. The swing still hung between 2 of them, a single rope replaced, the seat worn smooth by age and memory. She walked toward it slowly. There, beneath the dirt, just behind where the swing would drag its feet at full arc, something glinted. She crouched, dug with her hands. A tin box, small, locked. She held it against her chest, breath short. There was no key, but there would be. She was sure of it now. The tin box sat on her desk like it had always belonged there. Emily had wiped it clean with a dish towel from the kitchen, revealing faint patterns etched into the metal. Not decorative, just enough to suggest it was once handled often. Hand oil. Thumb pressure. Time. There was no visible lock, no hinge, but it wouldn't open. She'd tried sliding, twisting, prying. Nothing gave. So instead, she stared. For over an hour, she let the box rest beneath her palm like it might recognize her touch, like it might remember what it was for. Eventually, she slept with her hand still on it. When she woke, the box was gone. Not moved. Gone. She sat up too fast, knocking over the empty water glass. Her heart hit the edge of panic, sharp and premature. But then she saw it. On the windowsill, where no one had placed it, where it hadn't been before. This time the lid was slightly ajar. She reached for it slowly, with fingers that had not fully shaken sleep. Inside, a child's drawing. Crayons. Torn paper. 2 stick figures beneath a tree, one taller, one small, both smiling. A red bow in the child's hair. No names, no writing. But at the bottom corner, scribbled fast and uneven, "Let her out." Emily felt the breath leave her. The swing outside barely moved, though no wind passed through the trees. Arthur had left again that morning. She'd heard the truck pull away before sunrise. Something about that felt practiced, like he knew exactly when she needed space, and gave it not as a kindness but as a warning. She took the drawing to the attic. The wardrobe was waiting. When she pressed the paper against the wood, the panel shivered. Not moved, just shifted, like it had inhaled. The seam grew wider. She could now see a faint indentation running along the base, a line that suggested it could be pulled forward, if only the mechanism were understood. But no handle, no key, no instruction, only memory. In the study, she began opening drawers. The desk held nothing but dust and dead pens. But in the far cabinet, beneath a pile of old newspapers from 1992, she found a manila folder bound with twine. Inside were letters, all addressed to her grandmother. All from the same sender. Unsigned, some typed, some handwritten, some barely legible. One began simply, "You said she wouldn't remember, but they always do." Another, "You can't bury a door." And a final one, the most recent, dated 2 years prior. "If she comes back, the box will find her. If the box opens, it's already too late." Emily reread it 3 times. Her hands shook, not from fear, from recognition. She had seen this handwriting before, on birthday cards, on recipes tucked into cookbooks. It was Arthur's. That evening she sat with her grandmother again, this time bringing no brush, no tea, no questions. Just the drawing. Evelyn opened her eyes slowly when Emily placed it on the blanket. Her face didn't change, but her fingers curled against the sheet. "Who was she?" Emily asked. Evelyn didn't answer. Instead, she said, barely above a whisper, "He never meant to hurt her." Emily blinked. "You're talking about Arthur." A pause. Then, "He thought he could quiet it, keep it from spreading. But the house, it listens." "To what?" Evelyn's eyes closed again. "To who's left out." That night, Emily didn't sleep. She walked the halls in silence, each floorboard pressing old breath from the wood. She reached the root cellar door around 3 a.m. She hadn't opened it in years, hadn't even touched it, but now it pulled at her. She turned the handle. It gave without resistance. Stairs led down into blackness. She took 3 steps, paused, and felt something shift behind her. Not in the hallway, inside the walls. She descended slowly. The air changed colder, thicker. At the bottom, her flashlight caught something on the ground. A red bow, identical to the one she'd found in the hallway. But this one was pinned to the floor with a rusted nail, and beneath it, scratched into the stone in messy, frantic lines. "She's not gone. She's waiting." Emily dropped to her knees, reached out, and from the dark behind the shelves, something whispered not in her ear, but in her chest. A child's voice. "You said you'd come back, Cody Nye." The whisper hung in the air long after the voice had faded. Emily sat motionless in the root cellar, knees stiff, fingers clenched around the edge of her jeans. The flashlight trembled slightly in her grip. Not from fear, not exactly, but from the sense that the house had just answered back. She didn't speak, didn't dare. Instead, she scanned the walls, the floor, the shadows. Nothing moved. But she no longer felt alone. She rose slowly and approached the far end of the cellar, where old crates and broken tools had gathered dust for years. Behind them, the foundation wall was cracked, hairline fractures spidering outward from a single stone. She pressed her palm to it. Warm, not freshly poured, not sun-touched, just warm, like it had a pulse. She returned upstairs with the red bow still in her hand. It felt heavier now, like it remembered more than it should. Arthur's truck was back. She heard it before she saw it, the familiar rattle of an engine that needed work but hadn't been given the time. He stood in the kitchen when she entered, back to her, stirring something on the stove. Without turning, he said, "Did you find her?" Emily stopped in the doorway. "She's not buried, is she?" He kept stirring. "She was never dead," she said. Arthur finally turned. His eyes were sunken, older than she remembered. Not tired, just emptied. "She asked for it," he said quietly. "She begged for someone to listen." Emily took a step forward. "And you silenced her?" "No," he said. "I tried to keep her here." The room swayed. Not physically. Emotionally. Like the truth had tilted everything slightly off balance. Arthur sat down at the table, hands flat on the wood. "She wasn't supposed to remember," he whispered. "Your grandmother promised me she wouldn't." Emily placed the bow on the table between them. "Then explain this." "Good." He stared at it. "Didn't touch it." "Sometimes," he said, "the house chooses who gets to forget." That night, Emily sat outside beneath the birch trees, the swing stilling gently behind her. She held the box again, now closed once more, the drawing gone. In its place, a key. Tiny, iron, ornate. She didn't recognize it, but her hands did. Her fingers curled around it like they'd been shaped to hold it since birth. The wind stirred the trees, and for a moment, the night smelled like rain. But no storm came. At 2:13 a.m., the house whispered again. This time, through the walls. She followed the sound up the stairs, not to the attic, to the study. The wardrobe was no longer sealed. The seam had widened into a full crease. A thin line of darkness ran between the doors. She pressed the key into the groove. It didn't fit. It disappeared, slipped into the wardrobe like a breath, and the doors opened. Only a crack, enough to release a smell that wasn't dust or rot, but soil, turned earth. Something long kept underground. She didn't open it further, just stood there, watching. And something watched back, not with eyes, with recognition. The next day, her grandmother didn't wake. Emily found her curled on her side, a slight smile on her face, her hand loosely clutching the corner of the drawing, the original, now yellowed and torn. Emily took it gently and placed it inside the tin box. Not to keep it, to return it. To her, to the one waiting. That evening Arthur didn't come home. His truck was found a mile down the road, doors locked, keys still in the ignition. But no one inside, only a note taped to the steering wheel. 4 words. She remembers me now. Emily burned the note. Not to hide it. To free it. That night, the house didn't creak. Didn't hum. Didn't brez. It waited. Emily stood in the hallway between the wardrobe and the root cellar door. And for the first time since she returned, she understood something that had been whispering between the lines. She was never meant to leave this place untouched. Because the house didn't want witnesses. It wanted participants. She ran her fingers along the wallpaper as she walked. At the very end of the hall, she found a crack. Thin. Quiet. Like a voice waiting to be spoken. And with no hesitation she pressed her hand against it. The wall sighed. And opened. The passage behind the crack in the wall was narrower than she expected. It didn't feel like a hallway. It felt like a wound. The air grew colder with each step, but not dead cold, not like basements or winter mornings. It was alive, damp, like breath exhaled through stone. Emily didn't bring a flashlight this time. She didn't need it. The walls glowed faintly, not from any visible source, but from the memory of light. A color that wasn't quite white, not quite blue. A color that might be bone, if bone could whisper. As she moved forward, the walls narrowed, then widened again into a small chamber no bigger than a pantry. There was no furniture, no shelves, only a chair, wooden, simple, facing the wall, and beside it, a small pair of shoes, child-sized, untouched by dust. Emily stood in the doorway for a long moment before stepping inside. She didn't touch anything, didn't speak. Just felt. The room pulsed, softly, like a slow heartbeat. Then a voice. High, light, tired. You came back. Quote. Emily turned slowly. No one. But the voice didn't come from behind her. It came from the chair. She took one step closer. The chair didn't move, but the air around it shifted like something had risen, unseen. She never meant to forget me, the voice said. I know, Emily whispered. The shoes vanished. Not blinked, not stolen. Vanished, like they'd never been there. But the chair remained. And on its seat, a small white bow, frayed at the edges. No initial. No thread. Only memory. Back upstairs, dawn was beginning to press pale light through the kitchen curtains. Emily stood at the sink and poured herself a glass of water, but she didn't drink it. She held it, watching how the light bent through the surface. Her grandmother's room was still and quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't belong to sleep anymore. Emily didn't check. She didn't need to. She knew. Some things don't need to be seen to be understood. Later that morning, the sheriff came by. Not because anyone called, because that's what they do in towns like this. When old women stop appearing in windows, when smoke stops curling from chimneys that always lit too early, he asked the usual questions. When did you find her? Was she in pain? Do you have someone to stay with you? Emily nodded in all the right places, signed where she was told, then asked, just once, do you remember a girl named Lily? The sheriff frowned, shifted. No one by that name's lived here since the war. What war? He paused, didn't answer, just tipped his hat, stepped back onto the porch, and walked away. She didn't open the wardrobe again. She didn't have to. Whatever lived behind it now breathed with her. lived in the house the way dust lives settled, soft, constant. That night, she dreamed of the birch trees. They moved in patterns not shaped by wind. They bent inward, toward something, toward her. And in the clearing, the swing turned on its own. Slow, rhythmic, like a cradle. When she woke, the box was gone. And in its place on her pillow, pressed into the fabric, a drawing. New, still smudged from the crayon. It showed 3 figures, 2 tall, 1 small, all holding hands. And beneath them, we remember. Emily didn't cry, didn't smile. She folded the drawing carefully, placed it inside the back of her grandmother's Bible, and closed it without ceremony. Then she opened the front door. And for the first time since returning, she crossed the threshold not to leave but to stay. Because some houses don't just want to be haunted. They want to be kept. The house didn't sleep. Not anymore. It rested, yes. It breathed in walls and settled deep into its bones. But sleep, the innocent kind, the kind without memory, was gone. Emily moved through it now like she belonged to it. She no longer tiptoed around creaking boards or questioned cold spots in doorways. She stopped waiting for the knocks. She knew where they came from now. From within. It had been 3 days since Evelyn passed. There'd been no funeral, no gathering, no casseroles and foil-wrapped dishes delivered to the porch. Emily hadn't told anyone, because no one asked. And maybe, because the town already knew. She spent the morning in the back garden, pulling weeds that had grown like fingers from the cracks in the stone path. The birch trees stood still. Their bark shimmered in slits of sun, peeling gently, like skin sloughing off a memory. Under one of the trees, she found a marble. Green glass, with a swirl of gold at the center. She held it up to the light and watched the gold twist. It reminded her of something, of someone. But the thought fled too fast to name. That night, she heard the radio. Not music, not voices, just static, coming from the attic. She climbed the steps slowly, barefoot now, the cold wood like a second heartbeat under her soles. The radio was on the floor, one of those old tabletop kinds, rounded corners, the kind that hummed before sound emerged. She didn't remember seeing it before. She didn't remember owning it. But it was here. And playing. She knelt. The dial turned on its own. Softly. A voice rose from the static. A girl's. Singing. Off-key. Innocent. Something about a garden. Or maybe a window. The lyrics blurred as if sung through water. Emily didn't interrupt. She let the song play through, her eyes closed, the back of her neck prickling not from fear, but memory. When it stopped, the radio clicked. Then silence. She opened her eyes. On the floor beside it, a scrap of paper, torn from a notebook, written in pencil. Ask her where the blue ribbon went. She stared at it for a long time, then folded it, placed it in her pocket, and went back downstairs. She didn't go to bed. Instead, she sat at the kitchen table, candle burning low, and waited for the sun to rise. Just before dawn, she heard Evelyn's voice. Not from a dream, not from memory. From the hallway, calling her name, just once, like an invitation. She followed the sound to the study. The wardrobe stood open. Not wide, just enough. She stepped inside. Not through, not past, just into. The air was warm, thick, smelled of rosemary and old soap, of someone long gone who still pressed against the world from time to time. Inside, the walls had changed. Covered now in scraps of paper, sewn together photographs, fragments of handwriting she barely recognized. One page bore her own name, another, Evelyn's, in red ink, and one she didn't expect, Lily May Carter. The girl, the forgotten, the not gone. Emily stepped closer, and there beneath the name a pressed blue ribbon, flattened in glass, taped gently to the wall. She stood there a long time, long enough for the house to shift again, long enough for the air to press inward like lungs around breath. Then the door behind her closed. She didn't panic. She didn't move. Instead, she whispered, "I'm ready." The house breathed back, and somewhere inside the walls, a voice said, "Then listen carefully. There's more you need to remember. The voice inside the walls didn't sound like Evelyn anymore. Not exactly. It was softer, higher. Like a child echoing back an older memory. The way dreams borrow faces, twisting them just enough to be familiar but wrong. Emily stood still in the dark, surrounded by papered walls that fluttered without wind. Her fingers brushed the ribbon behind the glass. It felt warm, faintly pulsing, like it had its own heartbeat. She didn't pull it free. Instead, she asked quietly, "What do you want me to see?" And the wall answered, not in words, but with a sound. "Door unsettling." She turned. A portion of the wood paneling folded inward, revealing a corridor that hadn't been there seconds ago. Narrow, curved, leading downward. Not down like stairs. Down like roots. She stepped inside. The air changed. Not colder. Just older. Like walking into a memory that didn't belong to her body but knew her shape. Each step felt longer than it should have. And though she walked slowly, the world around her began to quicken. Flashes of movement in her peripheral vision, like shadows watching from the edges of light. At the bottom, the corridor opened into a room. She knew it before she saw it. A child's room. Tiny bed. Worn quilt. Books stacked unevenly beside a window painted shut. And on the floor, a second ribbon. Blue, frayed, dust-covered. She picked it up. It dissolved. Not into dust. Into sound. A giggle. Quick. Then cut off. In the corner, the rocking chair began to move. Back. And forth. Empty. Until it wasn't. Until she saw her. A girl. No older than 7. Long brown hair. Dress too thin for the season. Bare feet. Lily. She didn't speak. Didn't blink. Just rocked. And in her lap, a book. Open to a picture Emily remembered. Not from her life. From her dreams. A field of birch trees under storm clouds. Lily looked up. Her eyes were wrong. Too deep. Too knowing. "You forgot me," she said. Emily's throat tightened. "I didn't." "You did," Lily said calmly. "Everyone does. That's how the house feeds." Emily stepped closer. "Feeds on what?" "On space," the girl said. "On silence. On what's left behind when memory's too painful." The walls groaned. Not with decay. With hunger. "You left me here," Lily whispered. "They promised they'd come back, but they didn't. Not until you." Emily's knees buckled. She knelt on the floor. "I'm here now," she said. "I won't leave you." Lily smiled. But not with her mouth. With her presence. And everything went dark. When Emily woke, she was lying in the hallway. The wardrobe behind her shut, the ribbon clenched in her fist whole again. On the floor beside her, a single card. Yellowed, curling at the corners. Her grandmother's handwriting. "You are the keeper now." She didn't leave the house that day. Or the next. She didn't call anyone. Didn't explain. There was nothing left to explain. Only to witness. The walls began to shift more freely now. Sometimes at night, doors would open on their own, revealing rooms she'd never known existed. Rooms that remembered people who hadn't been born yet. Sometimes she heard Evelyn humming downstairs. Sometimes she heard Lily laugh. Sometimes she heard her own voice, though she wasn't speaking. And sometimes she saw her reflection in the mirror, and it blinked before she did. Late one night, Emily returned to the root cellar. The bough was gone. In its place, a note etched into the stone with a child's handwriting. "We are all still here." She closed her eyes, placed her hand flat against the wall, and felt it breathe. Once. Then still, she started to dream in rooms she hadn't entered yet. The kind with slanted ceilings and wallpaper no one remembered choosing. Rooms where the light moved wrong, shadows too slow, windows too quiet. In these dreams, she was both younger and older than she'd ever been. Her hands were smaller, her voice distant, like it came from behind a wall. But when she woke, her fingers remembered what they'd touched in the dark. And something had always shifted. A drawer left open that she hadn't touched. A chair turned slightly toward the door. The smell of lavender and ash in her clothes. The house was learning her shape. And she was learning its language. One afternoon she found a journal. Not Evelyn's. Not hers. Tucked beneath a floorboard in the room that used to be a sewing nook, It was bound in fabric red velvet, frayed, stained at one corner like it had once been hidden beneath something heavy. She didn't open it right away, just sat with it in her lap, fingers tracing the seam. The house felt still, not watching, not whispering, waiting. She opened to the first page and found a name. Not hers. Clara. The entries were written in cursive so delicate it looked like thread. They dated back over 80 years. Clara had lived here. Not rented. Not visited. Lived. Raised children here. Watched them vanish one by one. Her husband first gone in a storm that never reached the town. Then her son, at the bottom of the stairs, neck bent wrong, eyes still open. Then silence. For years. Until the girl, the one who came from nowhere, spoke in rhyme and drew birds with no eyes. Lily. The last entry was short. She's not a child. Don't look at her too long. She wants to become someone. And if you let her, it'll be you. Emily closed the book, pressed it to her chest. The wallpaper behind her rustled softly, as if exhaling. That night, the swing creaked again. Emily stood by the back door, watching it through the glass. It moved like breath, steady, rhythmic, and on it a shape, not large, not small. A silhouette just human enough to be familiar. She didn't open the door, didn't need to, because the voice reached her anyway. Inside her school. Not painful, just present. You see now, don't you? We never left. We only waited for someone to remember us whole. Emily backed away. The door stayed shut. But her reflection in the window lingered too long. Moved a second after she did. And behind it, another. Smaller. Smiling. In the morning the rooms had rearranged. The kitchen opened into a hallway that didn't exist before. The hallway led to the study. But the study was now a nursery. Painted pale green. Empty crib. Mobile spinning without wind. A single note pinned to the wall. She asked for a sister. You answered. Emily sat on the floor. She didn't cry. Didn't scream. But something cracked inside her, quietly. Like wood bowing beneath too much weight. She understood now. This wasn't about the house haunting her. It was about the house needing her. To finish something. To carry it. To become it. And she was almost ready. Almost. Later that evening, she opened the wardrobe again. Behind the coats, a staircase spiraled downward, stone steps slick with moisture, carved too precisely to be old, yet worn like they'd been used for generations. She descended. Slowly. Each step a heartbeat. Each breath a confession. At the bottom, the air was warm. And the room, empty. Except for a mirror. No frame. No backing. Just a slab of reflection leaning against the wall. She approached it. Her face looked normal. Then younger. Then someone else. Then Lily. Smiling. Not kindly. But patiently. Emily raised her hand. And Lily mirrored it. Until they touched. And the glass rippled. The mirror didn't break. It folded. Like silk drawn into itself. The moment Emily's palm met Lily's, the surface buckled inward, not shattered, not wet, just yielding. The sensation was like pushing through breath made visible, or memory given texture. She didn't fall in. She was taken. When her feet found the floor again, she wasn't in the cellar. She was in the hallway upstairs. Except it was brighter. The wallpaper was new. The air smelled of lemon polish and Sunday soup. Somewhere down the hall, a radio played softly, something orchestral. Staticky. Older than her. Emily turned. The front door was ajar. Outside, afternoon sun slanted across the porch steps. A boy's bicycle leaned against the railing. The wind carried laughter, children. But this wasn't memory. This was present. Somebody's. Maybe even hers. She stepped into the living room. And there she was. Her grandmother. Not frail. Not dying. Alive. Younger than Emily had ever seen her. Hair pinned. Apron on. Kneeling by a coffee table, helping a girl with a puzzle. The girl turned. Lily. Not ghostly. Not broken. Whole. Real. Laughing. Emily stepped back, breath caught like fabric in a closing door. No one noticed her. She was not body here. She was presence, a shadow of what would be, a witness. She followed them through the afternoon, Clara humming while folding laundry, Lily singing nonsense songs to the cat, who appeared far more tolerant than expected. The house was alive in a way Emily had never known it could be, not just functional joyous. And then, dinner. 3 places set, only 2 filled. Emily stood in the corner of the kitchen, unseen. Clara sat at the table, Lily beside her, and the 3rd chair empty, until Clara reached across it, held something, invisible. "I miss you," she said, to no one, to someone. And that's when Emily realized this wasn't before. It wasn't after. It was in between. A space held by grief so thick it shaped reality around it. The house hadn't trapped her. It had wrapped her in memory, not to haunt, but to teach. When Emily returned to the mirror, she was holding something. A ribbon. Red, not blue. And a key. Heavy. Worn. Made of a metal she couldn't name. She climbed the attic stairs. The house moved with her. Not physically. Emotionally. It leaned toward her steps. The attic door opened on its own. Inside, the air pulsed with recognition. She crossed to the trunk in the corner. It had never opened. Until now. The key slid in like it belonged to her hand all along. Inside. A box of letters. Dozens. All addressed to Miss Lily Carter. Sent from places Emily had never been. Signed by names she recognized but couldn't place. Letters that had never been mailed. Letters that had waited. She picked one up. Opened it. The paper was blank. Until her tears touched it. And then? Words. Handwriting she knew in her bones. Her own. Though she had never written them. "I remember now. And I will never let you vanish again." Somewhere beneath her, the house exhaled. Not with sorrow. Not with rage. But with release. Not everything needs to be solved. Some things only need to be held long enough to feel real again. Emily stayed in the attic that night. She read every letter, one by one, until the sun crept back over the trees and the birds began their cautious songs. And when she finally slept, she dreamed of nothing. Not because she'd forgotten, but because she'd finally remembered enough to rest. The attic light never turned off. Emily woke to its glow low, amber, not quite natural. The kind of light that seemed to exist between seconds. Dust floated through it like slow snow, catching in her breath as she sat up on the creaking floorboards. All the letters were gone. Not scattered. Not misplaced. Just gone. In their place, a single envelope. Blank. No name, no stamp, no seal. Inside, one sheet of paper, folded once crisp. She opened it and read, "You have remembered enough. Now choose what you will forget." Her fingers trembled. Not from fear, from certainty, because deep down, she already knew. The house didn't just collect what people left behind. It offered a trade. Downstairs, the house had shifted again. The kitchen was no longer where she'd left it. The hallway curved differently, the wallpaper a pattern she couldn't name, ink-black vines climbing a pale sky. She paused by a mirror. Her reflection blinked half a second late, then smiled when she didn't. She didn't linger. The door to the study was closed now. Locked. The key was not in her pocket. But her hand, moving before she could think, reached into the seam of the staircase and pulled out a small iron shape. As if she'd done it before. As if a version of her already had. The key slid in, turned, clicked. The study opened like a held breath. And inside, the door. The one from childhood. The one that had vanished behind paint and drywall in years of silence. Now fully visible. Standing. Waiting. It had no knob. No hinges. Just a frame pulsing faintly like it was breathing. Or listening. Emily stepped closer. The air grew thick. Not cold. Not warm. Just aware. The door shimmered. And a voice your own, older, unfamiliar spoke from nowhere and everywhere. If you open it, you stay. If you don't, you carry it forever. Either way, you are the keeper. She reached forward, but her hand stopped, because behind the door, something knocked. 3 times. slow, and somehow gentle. She closed her eyes and listened. This time she didn't hear Lily. She didn't hear Clara. She heard herself, younger, smaller, alone. "Please," the child voice said. "I don't want to forget." Emily opened her eyes, stepped back. "No," she whispered. "Not to the house. Not to the voices. To herself. I won't trade what made me. I'll carry it." And as soon as she spoke the words, the door began to dissolve. Not fade. Not disappear. Just unravel. Like a ribbon unwinding in wind. And behind it, not darkness. Not light. A room. Simple. Unremarkable. A twin bed. A journal. A chair. Emily stepped through. And the moment she crossed the threshold, she remembered. The first knock. The reason she'd run. The face she couldn't draw without shaking. The moment Lily went missing. And the fact that she was there when it happened. Not watching. Not hiding. Helping. She fell to her knees. The memory burned through her ribs like fire given voice. She saw Lily's hand in hers. She saw the promise she made. "I'll come back for you." She saw herself walk away anyway. And the house always the house watching. Not punishing. Not accusing. Just witnessing. She wept. Not for what she did, but for what she forgot in order to live. And when the sobs finally stilled, the house creaked gently, like someone settling beside her, and a hand small, soft, touched her shoulder. She didn't flinch. She turned. Lily stood there. No older. No angrier. Just present. "You remembered," she said. Emily nodded. "I didn't want to." Lily smiled. "You weren't supposed to want. You were supposed to choose." Outside, the wind began to move again. Leaves whispered. Time reset its rhythm. And upstairs, the attic light finally flickered out. The days stopped behaving. They no longer came in sequence. Emily would wake to morning light, only to find snow on the windows, the smell of roasted chestnuts drifting in from a season long past. Other times the clock would strike 3 while the sun hung high like it had just risen. Once, she opened the hallway door and stepped into the evening of her 12th birthday, the red dress, the silence, the unwrapped box she never remembered opening. She wasn't dreaming. The house was folding, not collapsing. Folding like pages in a book being reread in the wrong order, over and over, until the edges blurred and the ink bled. And somewhere in the middle of it, Emily remained. Unmoored, but anchored. Because now, she remembered everything. And that remembering had weight. The hallway mirrors began to reflect versions of her she didn't recognize. One smiled too widely. One wept without moving. One stood still with eyes completely black. She learned not to look too long. She learned to whisper, "Not yet," as she passed, and the glass would soften, releasing her back into whatever time she belonged to next. If she still belonged to any. Lily came and went. Not like a ghost. More like a breeze, sudden, light, often just after you've stopped expecting it. Sometimes she spoke. Sometimes she didn't. But every time, she brought something forgotten. A song. A spoon. A scar. "You're the house now," she said once, swinging her legs off the porch that no longer led anywhere. Emily had wanted to laugh, but it didn't feel like a metaphor anymore. It felt like instruction, like warning. She kept the letters, the red ribbon, the key. She kept them close, in a drawer beneath the bed that no longer matched the room it sat in. One morning she opened it and found a 5th item, a single Polaroid, faded, half-burned. She turned it over. In faint pencil, "It starts again with forgetting." She didn't understand. Not until that night. Emily lit a candle before bed, a habit now, more comfort than necessity. Shadows still gathered at the edge of her vision, but they never crossed the flame's reach. The house respected boundaries she didn't know she'd drawn. She placed the photograph beneath her pillow, closed her eyes, and woke in her childhood home. Not the house. The apartment before it. Bright yellow walls. Plastic stars on the ceiling. The sound of her parents fighting in the other room. Real. Solid. Present. She was 8. And she was alone. She walked the apartment like a museum. Everything perfectly placed. until she opened the hallway closet and found the door again. Wrong place. Same shape. She didn't ask why. She stepped through and returned to the house. But it wasn't where she left it. This version was cleaner, sharper, empty. No Lily, no voices, just silence. And something written on the wall in her own handwriting. Do not stay too long in someone else's memory. You forget which parts were yours. Emily touched the words. The wall felt warm. Like skin. She staggered back. Her name echoed down the hallway once, then again. She ran. Faster than she thought her body could move. Turned every corner as it folded into the next. Until she reached the study. The door had returned. But this time it was closed. No shimmer. No hum. Just still. A final test, maybe. Or an invitation. She didn't open it. She sat down beside it. Back against the wall. Hands in her lap. And for the first time in days, weeks, years, she felt steady. The house didn't breathe. The mirrors didn't whisper. The wind didn't carry a name. Just silence. And in it, Emily rested. Not escaped. Not freed. But present. The house began to forget her. At first, it was small things. The kitchen no longer recognized her hand on the faucet. The water came scalding or freezing, never right. Her room, once a soft amber shell of memory, returned each night colder, stripped bare of comfort. The floorboards that used to groan in welcome now stood mute under her steps. And then came the names. Lily, Clara, Evelyn. Gone. Not from her mind but from the house itself. Photographs curled away into blankness. Journals shed ink like autumn bark. Even the voice in the radio, a voice that used to sing her grandmother's lullaby, whispered in a language she couldn't follow. Emily tried to speak their names aloud. They wouldn't leave her tongue. They came out as air, as static, as silence wrapped in breath. The house wasn't angry. It was grieving. Not over loss. Over burden. She had stayed too long. Held too much. And like any vessel filled beyond measure, it began to crack. One morning the walls pulsed. Visibly. She touched them and felt nothing. No wood. No warmth. Just motion beneath skin. Breathing. Or remembering. Or both. She returned to the attic, where she once found letters and answers. Now it was just dust and a single candle. Unlit. Melted to the base. No matches. No flame. She sat beside it and listened. But the house no longer whispered. Only hummed. A low, constant sound like wind inside stone. She wandered through hallways that changed while she walked them. The stairs folded upward into floors that didn't exist. Windows showed skies from memories she'd never lived, sunsets behind unknown cities, moons shaped like hands, snow that fell in colors. She was no longer just remembering. She was dreaming inside memory itself. And slowly, losing the shape of herself. That night, she found the journal again. The one from Clara. But this time, it bore her name. Not on the outside. Inside. Written over and over. Not like a diary. Like a warning. Emily. 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 She flipped through. Each page held a version of her handwriting she didn't recognize. Some curled and delicate. Some frantic, like scratched bark. Each entry ended the same. Do not stay. She ran. Not toward something. Away. From the attic. From the door. From the mirror. She ran through the house like a fever, bare feet slapping against time-bent wood. Until she reached nothing. A room with no walls. No ceiling. Just darkness curled into itself. And a single figure. Lily. But not a child. Not anymore. She was taller. Older. Her face shifting between ages like water held too loosely. She looked at Emily. Not with sadness. With expectation. You stayed. Emily nodded. I thought I had to. No one has to. Then why? Lily stepped forward. Took her hand. Because we remember until we forget ourselves. And sometimes that's the kindest thing we can do. They stood in silence. No wind. No house. Just space. And then, gently, Lily let go. The moment she did, the ground returned. The walls reassembled. The house breathed her back. But it was different now. Everything simpler. No hechos. No doors that didn't belong. Just a home. Empty. But waiting. Emily sat at the kitchen table. Made tea without fear of what the kettle would whisper. Wrote a letter. Not to Lily. Not to Clara. To the next person. Whoever they might be. If you found this, you've already begun to remember. The house is patient, but it will not carry what you refuse to feel. Don't chase the truth. Sit with it. That's all it ever wanted. She folded the letter, placed it beneath the floorboard where the red journal once lay, then stood, walked to the porch, and for the first time, stepped out. The road looked the same. Puddles. Gravel patches. Mailboxes rusted like forgotten questions. But Emily walked it differently now. Not slower. Not faster. Just deliberately. Her steps matched something deeper than rhythm. Like her feet remembered a path older than the pavement beneath them. Like memory had sunk into her bones and made a home there. She didn't look back. Not because she couldn't. Because she didn't need to. The house would always be there. Wherever there was. She'd simply stepped out. Not escaped. Not exiled. But released. She reached the motel at dusk. The air smelled like electricity before rain. Room 6 still had her name on the register, even though she hadn't signed it in weeks. The clerk didn't look up when she passed. Just nodded, almost like he'd been waiting for her to return, but had long stopped checking the door. Inside, everything was as she left it. One bed, one lamp, one cracked window. And on the nightstand, a small rock, smooth, warm. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared at it, then picked it up. It pulsed. Not literally, but something in it answered her touch, and with it came a single word. Not a whisper, not a thought, just a knowing. Still, Emily didn't sleep that night. She watched shadows shift across the ceiling, tracing invisible lines that never formed a full picture. At 3:21 a.m., she opened the drawer, found the journal again, except this time, the pages were full, handwriting familiar. Her own, but none of it written consciously. Words she didn't remember knowing. Stories she hadn't lived, and every entry ended the same way. You brought it with you. She didn't cry, she didn't shake, she just nodded, because it made sense. Of course she did. The house had never been a place. It had always been a container, and now part of it lived in her. The next morning, she left the motel. No checkout. No key return. She walked until the streetlights stopped recognizing her, until the town began to look like something she might have dreamed. At a small diner off Route 7, she stopped for coffee. The waitress smiled. "You look like you just came from a long story," she said. Emily smiled back. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just in the middle." The woman poured her coffee without asking. "I get that," she said. "Some stories you don't get out of. You just carry." Emily drank in silence. The coffee was burnt. Too hot. It tasted perfect. A man at the counter watched her like he almost remembered something. Like a dream he'd had once about a door in a place he never lived. Their eyes met. She didn't flinch. He didn't speak. But she knew. Another one. Not yet opened. But soon. Outside, the clouds thickened. She left a tip on the table, a little stone beside it. Smooth. Warm. The waitress picked it up, turned it once in her palm, then placed it in her apron without a word. Emily stepped outside. The wind pressed gently against her back. Not urging, just knowing. She walked until the horizon stopped. Not ended, just became something else. And somewhere behind her, in the place people go when they forget what they tried to remember, a house stood quietly. Its windows closed, its doors asleep. But in the kitchen drawer, beneath a folded letter, the journal remained, waiting. Because memory doesn't fade, it settles, like dust. And like dust, it only needs a little light to dance again. It began with a hum. Not in the ears. In the bones. Low. Steady. Like a cello string held taut in her chest, vibrating to something no one else seemed to hear. Emily ignored it at first. People ignore many things when the world expects them to smile. She kept walking. Town after town. not aimless, just untethered. Like a leaf the wind forgot to let go of. She stayed in places that didn't ask for ID. Eateries that served coffee without questions. Motels with rooms that smelled of pine cleaner and old television static. Everywhere she went, people stared just a second too long. Children looked at her and tilted their heads like dogs listening to thunder. They didn't speak. But they noticed. In one small town tucked between old mining hills and mist-drenched woods, Emily stopped. There was nothing remarkable about it. That's why she chose it. She rented a room above a bookstore that no longer sold books, only postcards, loose buttons, and 1,000 dusty paperbacks no one dared reshelve. The owner was a woman named Ida. Her hands looked like they had stories trapped in them. She gave Emily a brass key and a brief glance that lingered just long enough to mean, "You're not the first." Emily unpacked nothing. She didn't need to. The hum had grown louder now. Not invasive. Just waiting. Like something inside her was almost ready to speak. At night, Emily walked. Not to see. To feel. There was a rhythm to the town's silence. Like every lamppost remembered a name. Like the sidewalks had teeth but chose not to bite. One night, she passed a man asleep on a bench outside the hardware store. He twitched once in his sleep and whispered, "Not again." She didn't stop. Didn't need to. Some truths don't require company. Only witnesses. In the mirror above the bathroom sink, her reflection had begun to fade. Not entirely. Just slightly off. The eyes looked like hers, but deeper. Older. One night she blinked, and the reflection didn't. She stared. The mirror softened, as if it remembered being water. For a moment, she thought she saw the house behind her. The birch trees. The porch. The door. But it passed. She wiped the glass with her sleeve. The smudge remained. 3 days later it arrived. Wrapped in brown paper. No postage. No handwriting. Just a package left at the door like a forgotten child. Inside, a stone. Smooth. Warm. And beneath it, a single page torn from her journal. But written in a hand that wasn't hers. "You are close, but not alone." She folded the note. "Didn't burn it. Didn't burn it." She placed it under her pillow, and that night she dreamed of nothing. Except Anok, 3 times. But this time, it came from inside her chest. She woke gasping. The hum had grown teeth. Every breath dragged echoes with it. She went to the window. The trees below didn't move, but they watched. Even without eyes, they watched. And Emily? She didn't flinch. She simply placed a chair in the corner of the room, faced it toward the door, and waited. Not for fear, not for release, but for understanding. Because she knew now, the house hadn't let her go. It had extended itself. And the door, it wasn't a place anymore. It was a person. He arrived just before dusk. Not with thunder, not with questions. Just a quiet presence behind the sound of the door chime, carrying the scent of old tobacco and wet leaves. Emily didn't turn to look. She knew it was him. Knew the shape he cast before he entered. Knew the way the air bent differently when someone who remembered things they shouldn't be able to remember walked in. He moved through the store slowly, fingered the spine of a book that hadn't been opened in decades, paused by the postcards, then wordlessly made his way upstairs. Emily stood in the hallway, already holding the key. "I'm not here by accident," he said. She nodded. "I know." He took the room next to hers. Didn't ask for anything. Not blankets. Not light. Not even her name. But that night, through the thin walls and the even thinner silence, Emily heard him whisper a word. Just one. A name. Lily. And something inside her twisted. Not pain. Not memory. Just recognition. The next morning he knocked once. Not like someone wanting entry. More like someone confirming existence. She opened the door. He stood barefoot in the hall, holding a stone. Smooth. Warm. The same kind that had followed her like breadcrumbs through the wilderness of her own past. He didn't offer it. Just held it. Like it wasn't his to give. She stepped aside. Let him in. They sat at the small wooden table between their rooms. 2 cups of water untouched. No words at first. But not awkward. Not afraid. just quiet. Finally he spoke. I've been dreaming of a door, but every time I get close, it shifts. It becomes someone else's memory. Emily tilted her head. And when you touch it? He looked down. It bleeds. Her breath caught, but she didn't react. He continued. And then I hear something. A knock. But it's not asking to come in. It's asking me to remember. Emily closed her eyes. You're not dreaming, I know. The silence between them grew dense, like fog with a pulse. She reached into her coat, pulled out the journal. Not hers. Not Clara's. A new one. Blank. She slid it across the table. You'll need this. He hesitated. What for? She met his eyes. To decide. He frowned. I thought I already had. You haven't? Not really? Deciding to follow the door is instinct. Deciding to open it, that's invitation. He touched the journal. The cover felt damp, like it had just been pulled from a place that didn't believe in time. That night, he didn't sleep. Emily heard his footsteps pacing, pausing, pacing again. At 3 a.m, she stood outside his door. Didn't knocks. Didn't speak. Just stood there until he opened it. He looked different. Older. But not in years. In weight. You feel it, don't you? She asked. He nodded. It's calling. Not calling, she corrected. Echoing. It's remembering itself through you. He stepped back. Let her in. Inside, the journal was open. Pages already filled. Dozens of entries. All in his handwriting. None he remembered writing. She touched one. It burned. Not with heat. With clarity. The final page read, The door is not a passage. It is a mirror. And we keep returning not to escape but to remember we were the ones who built it. He stared at it, jaw tight. What if I don't want to be next? Emily placed a hand on his shoulder. Then teach someone else how to listen. That's the only way we break the cycle. He looked at her. Really looked. And for the first time, she saw herself reflected in someone else's eyes, not as haunted, but as human. I don't think I'm strong enough, he whispered. You don't have to be, she said. You just have to stay soft. The door only opens for the ones who haven't turned to stone. Quote. The room changed overnight. Luke didn't see it at first. Not with his eyes. But when he reached for the journal, the table was no longer cold. It breathed. Soft, subtle, like skin under shallow sleep. He jerked his hand back. The pages fluttered. Without wind. Without weight. As if the words themselves were shifting, reordering, preparing. He stood still for a long moment, waiting for logic to return. It didn't. Downstairs, Emily was already awake. She sat at the window that faced nothing, just the back alley and a wall of ivy, too stubborn to die. She didn't blink. Didn't stir. But as Luke entered the room, she spoke. It's thinning. He paused in the doorway. What is? The veil. The part between this and that. Luke stepped forward. The sunlight through the dirty glass left no warmth on the floor. Emily turned slowly. There's a place just beyond the town's edge. A shed. No lock, no power, no purpose. He tilted his head. You want me to go there? No, she said. I need you to. They walked at noon. The road twisted like memory, familiar in places, jarring in others. At a bend in the path where birch trees leaned too close together, Luke stopped. He turned to Emily. Why me? She didn't stop walking, but she answered. Because you're not trying to escape. You're trying to understand. That's rarer than you think. They reached the shed just as the wind stilled. Emily placed a small stone on the doorstep. Luke opened the door. Inside, dust floated in place like ash caught mid-breath. No furniture. No smell. Only air that didn't belong to the day. In the far corner, a mirror leaned against the wall. Not full length. Not ornate. Just simple, circular, cracked. Luke stepped toward it. And the hum returned. But it was different now. Deeper. Familiar. He looked into the glass. And flinched. Not because he saw himself. But because he didn't. What stared back wore his shape. But its eyes held too much silence. Its mouth moved with no sound. And its chest. 3 knocks. From within. He stumbled back. Emily caught him. Didn't speak. Didn't steady. Just was there. Luke pressed his hand to his chest. The rhythm inside was no longer his. Something else had moved in. I think it's trying to remember itself through me. Emily didn't answer. She didn't have to. They both knew. This wasn't about becoming the next. This was about becoming the door itself. Back in the room, Luke sat with the journal. The pages were blank again. Except one. In the middle, written in black ink that hadn't been there before. It's not who opens the door, it's who closes it behind them. Luke stared at the words for a long time. Then he picked up the pen, and beneath the line he wrote, "If I must carry it, I'll teach others how to set it down." That night he dreamed, not of the door, but of people walking past it, choosing not to open, smiling instead. Living, and somewhere in that dream, a voice spoke low and distant. Emily's voice, not calling him back, just anchoring him, like a candle left in the window of a house he might return to one day. When he woke, the journal was gone. In its place, a stone, smooth, still warm, and beside it, a note in Emily's handwriting, "You're ready. Not because you're fearless, but because you finally listened." He stood, looked out the window. The trees didn't move, but he felt their breath again, soft, knowing, waiting. And this time, he didn't hesitate. Emily didn't tell Luke she was leaving. Some part of her knew he would feel it anyway. Not through absence, but through the quiet. The way stillness settles in a room that's just lost a name. She walked before sunrise, before the fog lifted, before the town remembered its own edges, back to the field, back to the place where grass grew too evenly and birds never nested, back to the house. But it wasn't a house anymore. It was memory made solid, waiting. The birch trees bowed as she passed. Not in welcome. In resignation. They knew. They'd always known. The front porch creaked under her boots just as it had the first time she returned. But this time, it didn't feel nostalgic. It felt like crossing into a wound that never healed. She reached for the doorknob. It turned before her fingers touched it. Opened. No wind. No sound. Just air that had been held too long, exhaling at last. Inside, the house had changed. But not in the way rooms age. More like it had watched her leave, and rearranged itself accordingly. The hallway stretched longer. The shadows leaned sharper. The wallpaper pulsed faintly, as if holding breath. Emily stepped forward. The floor no longer creaked. It sighed. At the end of the hallway, the wall stood as it had before, but something had shifted in the geometry of it. It no longer pretended to be wall. It didn't need to. The outline of the door was now clear. Undeniable. Paint peeled away on its own, like skin rejecting disguise. And in the center a handle. Bone white. Smooth. She didn't reach for it. Not yet. Instead, she knelt, placed her palm against the wood. It was warm. Not like fire. Like pulse. It throbbed softly under her hand, sinking with her breath. For the first time in years, she let herself cry. Not for what she'd lost, but for the girl who'd first stood here barefoot, 16, full of hope and dread, and the kind of wonder that didn't yet know its cost. She whispered aloud, "I'm sorry I left you here." And the door answered. Not in voice. In sensation. A warmth that wrapped around her wrist. A hum that said, "I remember too." She stood, took a breath, and turned the handle, but didn't push. Not yet. Because behind the door something stirred. Something familiar. Not the thing that took Nate. Not the thing that whispered in her dreams. But something older. Something that had once been her. She heard her own voice, echoed in time. "Please don't forget me." And she didn't. Not anymore. She stepped back. Not out of fear. Out of choice. The door didn't open. Not because it wouldn't, but because it didn't need to anymore. She understood now. The door wasn't there to be passed through. It was there to be seen, to be remembered, and then left closed. That was the point. That had always been the point. As she turned away, the house didn't groan. Didn't beg. It breathed, like a secret finally heard. Outside, the birch trees stood taller. Their branches no longer clawed at the sky. They rested. And Emily? She walked back to the road. Not toward the town. Not toward Luke. But into whatever waited next. Not as a vessel. Not as a witness. But as someone who had held the door and refused to let it define her. She didn't need to be the keeper anymore. She was the closing. They say trauma fades. That time smudges sharp edges until pain becomes anecdote. Memory becomes metaphor. A story you tell in a tone soft enough not to scare anyone. But trauma doesn't fade. It evolves. Becomes quiet. Changes shape. Way. Luke knew the girl had never really left. Her name wasn't in the records anymore. No trace of her remained in the upstairs room. And yet, some nights, the lights flickered once, in rhythm with footsteps no one made. The mirror would hold fingerprints shaped like questions. And behind the counter, the journal stayed shut. Until the day it didn't. It opened on its own. Luke found it lying on the floor, face down. The page exposed was blank, except for a sentence written in dark wet ink. She stepped through. You left the door unlocked. He didn't remember leaving it open. But some truths ignore permission. He turned slowly, sensing a change in the room. The air had thickened, like breath too old to exhale. And the knock came, not from the wall, not from inside his chest, but from the mirror. He didn't move, didn't blink. Then, from behind the mirror, a second knock, quieter, closer. And then, his voice. His own. Let me out. But it wasn't him. Not this him. The knock returned, followed by scratching, as if nails traced the boundary between glass and breath. Luke backed away. The journal snapped shut on its own. The lights went out. He stayed in that silence for hours. Long after the shop closed. Long after the fog swallowed the street outside. When the lights returned, so did the reflection. But it wasn't him. Not quite. The eyes stared too long, smiled too wide, and blinked 1 second late. That night, Luke did not sleep. He sat on the bed with the lights on and the window open, listening to the birch trees whisper things they shouldn't remember. The journal was gone by morning. In its place, a stone. Cold now. Unfamiliar. Months passed. The store became quieter. Luke became quieter. Until he didn't speak at all. Until customers stopped entering, unsure why their hands froze on the doorknob. One winter evening, a child stood outside the shop, stared through the glass, saw a figure behind the counter. Tall. Still. Smiling. But when her mother looked, there was no one there. Just a mirror. And her own reflection blinking slower than it should. Somewhere, in a house with birch trees at its back, the door waits. No longer hidden. No longer warm. It knows who left it ajar. And it knows who will be next to forget that some doors were never made to close. Because the knocking doesn't ask for entry. It asks who's listening. And eventually, someone always is.